Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson we're going to do some XML parsing using the NS XML Parser class for the iPhone. So in this lesson there's really not going to be a whole lot of logic to grasp. Really it's just a matter of learning how to do it, and then from that point on you'll know how to parse XML. Basically what happens is you create a parser object, you tell it what XML file to parse, and then it runs through, and each time it finds an element, a new element, it lets a delegate, it's a delegate now. Each time it finds some data inside an element, it lets its delegate know, and then each time it finds the end of an element, it lets its delegate know. So let's get started with that. So of course I have Xcode open. We're going to create a new project, and as always we are going to choose a window-based application. We'll call it Parser. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to get that file for parsing ready. So let's we're going to upload this XML file I have on the desktop here, junkyard.xml, to a server, particularly the MyCodeTeacher server, in an XML subfolder on the root folder. And fortunately, very fortunately actually, if you create a parser object, an NS XML parser object, and you tell it to parse a file that exists on a remote server, it will download the file for you. So you don't have to use NSURL connection to get that file. So I'm going to open Coda here. And here I have the XML subfolder. And so I'm just going to drag the junkyard.xml file into this subfolder here and upload it to the server. And now that is up on the server. I can close this window now. And so now let's quickly take a look at this file here. So let's use quick look. And here is that junkyard.xml file. So we have basically a model of a very simple junkyard here where I'm the owner. And so we have the junkyard element, and then inside that we have cars, and each car has some properties. So inside each car element are 4 other elements, each which contains some actual data. So the company that made the car, the model, the vehicle identification number, and the color of the car. So I've got 2 cars here inside one junkyard. And so we're going to parse this, and what we're going to attempt to do is we're going to actually try to convert this XML file, this XML data, into real objects that are modeled after a real junkyard and a real car, or a very simple real junkyard and a very simple real car. So we're going to create a junkyard object, a subclass of NS object, and a car object. And so the junkyard object's job will be to maintain a list of car objects, and the car object's job will be simply to store these 4 properties here. So we're basically going to take this and turn it into something so we can use in Objective-C some objects. So let's close this here. Now we know what we're working with. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create that car object. So in the classes project folder here, let's create a new file. Objective-C class, a subclass of NS object, and we're going to simply call it car. So now let's set this car object up. So really all we need are 4 properties. So we can just add a bunch of NS string instance variables. The first is going to be the company that makes the car. The second is going to be the model. Third is the VIN, and the fourth is the color. And now we want to turn these into properties. So property read write copy company model VIN and color. Okay, so all we have to do now is synthesize this property, and our car object is done. So again, it's really simple. Its job is just to store a car's property. So we create a car object, and now we have, in a way, a car, and this car has some properties, and we're going to store those properties in the appropriate properties or instance variables here for the car object. So now let's create our junkyard. again, the junkyard's job is to maintain a bunch of car objects. Okay, so we're going to need first an owner instance variable. So ns string owner. And we're going to need an array, a mutable array, to store some cars. So we'll call this array cars, and we're going to want to import car.h. Then we're going to need some methods here. So first, let's create this owner instance variable, make it into a property. Okay, and now let's get those method declarations in there. So first, we want a method for adding a new car to the junkyard. So after we've created a junkyard object, when we first created it, it's not going to have any cars. So each time when we go through the parsing of the XML file, each time we find a new car, we're going to want to create a new car object and store that car in the cars array. Basically, give that car to the junkyard. So we're going to make a method here, add car, and it's going to take one parameter, which is going to be a car object, and we're just going to, in the implementation, just store that in the junkyard's cars array. The next method is going to be a method that returns a copy of the cars array. So we don't want to give any outside objects access to our internal cars array. We want to make sure that nothing goes wrong with that. So we're going to make a copy of the cars array and return that when an outside object wants those cars, wants to find out what cars exist in this junkyard. And the last is going to be a method that returns the number of cars in this junkyard. So now let's get to the implementation here. So first, what we need to do is we need to synthesize the owner property. Then we need to override the init method. So first, super init. Then we want to create that cars mutable array. So cars equals ns mutable array alloc. Of course, if we don't do this, the cars array never actually exists, and it's nil. We need to make an array to add cars to. So we might as well do it when we first create the junkyard in the init method. And then we need to return self here, and our init override implementation is complete. Now we need to implement the add car method. And even more simply, cars add object car. So we're calling to the cars array here. We're pulling the car object from the parameter here and adding it to the array by using the add object method. Now we need to implement the get cars method. We're going to return a copy of the cars mutable array. So we send it the copy message, and that creates an immutable NS array instance and returns it. And now, last, the cars count method. So return cars count. We call it the count method, and that returns the number of objects that exist in the cars mutable array. Now our junkyard object is complete, and now let's get to the XML parsing. So let's go to the .h here, and let's set up the parser app.get.h. So first, what we need is a junkyard instance variable. We need to import the junkyard.h file. Now, junkyard. So basically, this is just going to be, we're going to only have one junkyard here, and we're going to store that junkyard object in the junkyard instance variable here, and we're just going to reference that anytime we want to add a car, get the cars, or get the cars amount. And so now let's go to the .m file and let's create that new new junkyard object when the application finishes launching. So junkyard alloc init. Alright, now the next thing we want to do is let's actually create that parser object. So first, when we create an instance of NSXML parser, we create it and we initialize it with a URL of the XML file we want it to parse. Now, we need to create an NSURL object that contains the URL. So the URL of this file, of course, is that of the file we uploaded to the MyCodeTeacher server. So it's going to be http mycodeteacher.com/xml/junkyard.xml. So let's create that NSURL object so we can give it to the parser. So path URL, NSURL, URL with string. Of course, this is a class method that returns a URL object containing the string passed in this parameter here. http mycodeteacher.com/xml/junkyard.xml. Now we have the URL object. Now let's create the parser. So ns_xml parser. Parser, we'll call it ns_xml parser alloc init with contents of URL, and we're going to pass in the URL here. Now again, very fortunately for us, if you give an ns_xml parser object a URL that exists on an outside server, it will download it for you and then begin to parse it. So we don't have to create an NSURL connection object and implement all those delegate methods and download the file and save it locally. All we have to do is just give it to the parser object and it'll take care of that for us. That saves us a lot of work. So now we want to set the delegate of the parser. Now again, as a parser object parses the file as it goes through, finds elements, finds data, it notifies us by sending messages in the form of its delegate protocol. So we need to implement these delegate methods, and so we're going to do that in the parser app delegate class here. So we're going to set the delegate to self. So the parser is going to alert us in this object here, the app delegate, when while it's parsing the file. And now to tell it to begin parsing, we simply call it to the parse method and it will get going. So then it begins parsing. Now we need to implement those delegate methods. So the first we need to implement is parser. Of course, it passes itself in as its first parameter, so it's going to plug in self from its point of view, basically. Parser did start element and a string, so it'll call to this when it begins a new element. So if we just quick look this junkyard file here, so this is going to be a start of an element. So junkyard, this is the start of an element, car, company. So each time it starts a new element, it alerts us by calling to this delegate method here. Parser did start element, and then it passes the name of the element. So if it started the junkyard object, junkyard element, it would pass in junkyard here as the element name. Next up, we're not going to work with namespacing, so these next two parameters here are not going to be of any use to us, but of course we need to put them there. And then the qualified name also related to namespacing. We're not going to be working with, so we're using really simple XML file here. And the last is the attributes. So attributes dict. So again, if we take a look at this file here, see here that the only element that has an attribute is the junkyard element, and it has an owner attribute. So the parser will store all those attributes in a dictionary and pass that in to the did start element method in the last parameter, the attributes parameter. So it'll create an NS dictionary object, and the keys in each entry in the dictionary will be the key, the attribute, and the value will be what's in the quotes here. So we're going to have an NS dictionary with one object. The key of that object is going to be owner, and the value will be Anthony. So we can get the value in this attribute by calling to object for key owner. And we're going to do that here. So now we've got this complete. Now let's just make this a bit cleaner here. Okay, so now, first, we want to find out what element the parser has found. So we're going to use some if statements here. If element name is equal to string junkyard. So we're going to check to see if it's found the junkyard element first. if it has, we want to get what's in that owner attribute. So we have that junkyard object already created. Now we have that owner property. Let's set the owner property to the value of the owner key in that attributes dictionary. So object for key, owner. And now we have set the owner property for that junkyard object correctly. Now we're going to return. Now the reason we're going to return is if the element that the parser is alerting us about is in fact junkyard, then we know it's nothing else, and there's no reason for us to continue in this method implementation. So basically we're saving time by returning once we know what it's found. Next, if element name is equal to string car, so if it's found in a car element, we want to create a car object. New car alloc init. And now we need to add an instance value here. So the way this is going to work is the parser will alert us that it's found a car element, and then it'll alert us again each time it runs through when it's found company, model, VIN, and color. So it's going to be continuously calling to these methods. So this isn't going to all happen in, we're not going to know the values for all the properties in each car object with one method implementation run through. So we need to set this up so that the parser can run through as many times as it needs to, and we still have all the data. So we're gonna have to keep referencing back to this new car, and only when we find out that the junkyard reached the end of that car element can we add that car to the owner, and then when it finds another car object, we'll create a new one. So we need to go to the app.delegate.h file here, and we need to add, first we need to implement or import the car.h file, and then we need to create a car instance variable, current car, so we can keep referencing back to that car that we just created and give it all its appropriate properties before adding it to the junkyard. So we're going to store this car we just created in the current car variable, and then we can give it its appropriate properties when the parser finds company, when it finds model, and all those things. So now we are done with this delegate method implementation. The next one we have to do is parser did or found characters. Okay, so this part is probably going to be a little tricky. So basically what happens here is, if we again quick look this junkyard file, you see here that the first time the parser is going to actually find any characters or data is the company element. So up until the company element, it's just more element openings. So until here, this method is not going to be called to. But once we reach this first company element, inside here is some actual data, Toyota. So when it finds that, it's going to call to this method here, and it's going to pass in the string Toyota. So you can see here that it doesn't tell us what element it's found data for, but again, it doesn't need to, because when it finds the beginning of an element, it tells us with this method, and when it finds the end of an element, it tells us with the parser did end element method. So basically, this is going to be called in between those other two methods. So we don't really, it doesn't need to tell us again what it's found the characters in. What we need to do is we need to store what it finds in an instance variable string, and then once we get to the end of an element, we see what it is, and then we do with it what we need to. So let's go to the .h file here, and now we're going to have to add an ns mutable string, and the reason for that is when the parser runs through the data inside one of these elements, it may not actually when a parser runs through one of these elements, it may have to call to the parser found characters method multiple times with this one data piece here. So the first time it may call to it, it may pass in toy. The second time it may pass in Oda. So it's not going to give us all the data with one run through. So we need to make a mutable string so that we can keep adding to it. And then once we find the end of the element, then we know that it's given us all the data, and then we can use that data and then create a new string, a fresh string, to store the next data in the next element. So first, an if statement here. If current string is nil, so if we don't have a string, we're going to create a string equals mutable string out in it. And then once we have a string, we're going to want to append this new string on here. Append string. Okay, so again, the parser may call to this method multiple times before completing an element. Now, it probably won't here because we have very small bits of data, but again, it might. So we want to make sure that we get all the data inside of that element. So we're going to keep appending the data onto the string over and over again. And then once the parser calls to the found or did end element method, we know that it's completely found all the data, and then we can use that data appropriately. So we're done with that. Now we need to implement the parser did end element method. So parser XML parser did end element. Again, going to be stored in a string element name. Namespace URI. I'm not going to be working with this. Namespace and qualified name. Let's again split this up here so it's easier to read. Alright, now we need to implement this. So first, let's check to see if it has ended the junkyard object or element. So element name is equal to string junkyard. Now we're going to actually leave this in a way blank. Really, we're just going to return. The reason for that is if the parser has finished the junkyard element, there's nothing left for us to do. We've done everything we needed to do. So we're just going to return and stop it from checking to see if it's anything else, because of course if it's told us that it's junkyard, we know it's not car or any of the other properties, so we're just going to return the method and save it some time. If it's not the end of the junkyard element, let's check to see if it's the end of the car element. So if element name is equal to string car, junkyard add car. So now we know that we've completed a car element run through, and now we want to give that car, add that car object, the completed car object with all its appropriate properties. We want to add that to the junkyard. So we call it to the add car method, junkyard add car, current car. Now again, we stored the car that was created when we found a new car in the current car instance variable. We give it to that, and we need to return. The last thing here is, if it's neither junkyard or car, we know it's one of those four properties. So what we want to do here is we want to save that property in the current car. So current car set value current string. Now that value, the data that's inside of each of those four element properties, we stored in current string. So it was passed in here in this method. We stored it in current string, and now we found the end of that element. So for example, just so you can get a basic grasp of what's going on here, okay, so if let's say for example here that we are on the company property. So we have already at this point created a new car object because we've gone through that point, and so now I'm going to have to open this here. All right. So let's say, for instance, that we're on the company property. So now we've already created a car, and so now when it starts the company element, it's going to call to this parser did start element. And you can see here that when it starts company, we don't actually do anything because we don't really care. All we care about is once it's ended the element, and of course it'll let us know. So we don't do anything there. If it's found characters, so after it's called to the start element method and it passes in company as the element it's found, now it's going to move on to the actual data inside the element, Toyota. So it's going to pass in here, parser found characters, and it's going to give us Toyota. Maybe it won't give us the whole string at once, but we've already set up so that if it doesn't, we can still get the whole string. So we keep appending on the string while it runs through these characters. It may pass on T, then O, then Y. May pass in the whole thing at once, doesn't matter. So then we'll have that string, we'll store it in current string. Then it's going to call, once it finds the end of that, and then it goes on to the end of the company element, it's going to call to parser did end element. At this point, it's going to pass in company, the element name. So now, if it passes in company, we know it's not junkyard, it's not car, because if it were, it would have returned and the method would have stopped running. So we know it's either company, model, VIN, or color. So now we're going to set the current string, the characters that we found from the other method implementation on the inside. We're going to set the value, current string, for key. This is a method that you can send to any NS object, and it'll check to see if it has a property with the key. Now we have a property or a key that goes by the key company and model and VIN and color. So for key, element name. So we're giving the value current string, which we got from the other method, then that's going to be the data inside of these 4 elements, and we're setting that string for the element, for the key element name. So if we were on company, it would be set value Toyota for key company. And then the current car object that we were working with, the car object, will save Toyota as its company in the company property. And now we can close this here and we're done. But actually, we're not totally done because, again, here we keep appending on the new string. So once we know we've ended one of those 4 property elements, we're going to want to erase that string so the next time it doesn't append on. So if we don't erase it, we'll have Toyota and then it'll pass in matrix and it'll add that on, so it'll be Toyota matrix. We don't want that. So we need to release that string. And we want to, just to make sure, set it to nil so that the next time around it creates a new fresh string with no data. Now, we actually have some small tweaking to do here. Now you see, for some reason, the parser doesn't totally ignore white space. So we need to make a string that eliminates white space. So we're going to create a string here, ns string, current string no white space, we'll call it, equals current string by trimming characters in set ns character set. This is a class method, the ns character set class, white space and new line character set. Okay, so what we've done here is we've taken the current string and we've basically eliminated all the white space and the new lines and the tabs, and now we're just going to have basically alphanumeric characters or anything that isn't one of those 3. So we send the string by trimming characters in set, and then we tell it what set we want by calling to the ns character sets class method, white space and new line character set, and that basically returns some identifier to that set of characters that we want eliminated. And now we have a new string that has eliminated those, and now we're going to give that in the value. So current string with no white space. Okay, so now we're done with that. Now what we need to do is we've got our data here. We've got our car objects. We've got our junkyard. We've got all the data in the setting the properties for each car object. Now we want to actually do something with that data. So we have it, but we're not doing anything with it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a table view, and we're going to list this data in the table view. So let's open up the main window.zip file here. Let's move this to different space. Okay, and let's first add a table view outlet here so that we can tell the table view to refresh once the parser's finished parsing the file. So IB outlet, UI table view, main table view, we will call it. I'm going to save this. Now I can go to interface builder, and now let's add a navigation bar just so it looks nice. I've always felt that applications with no navigation bar look a little silly. Junkyard. And now let's add that table view. Okay. Now let's set up all the outlets that we need to here. So first, let's tell the table view to ask for its data from the parser appDelegate object. And now let's send the main table outlet to this table view we have in the main window here. Now let's save this and let's go back to Xcode. Okay, so first we need to implement one more parser method, and that is parser did end document. So when the parser completely finishes parsing the whole XML file that we've asked it to parse, it will call to this here, parser did end document. When it has finished ending the document, or finished parsing the document, it's reached the end of it, it's going to call to this, and we know that we've got all our data, and now we're going to refresh the table view. So main table view reload data. That's all we need to do there. Now let's implement the data source methods for our table view so it knows what data to display. So first, what we always need to implement, number of sections in table view return 1. We want really one section, so return a constant 1. Next, ns integer table view UI table view number of rows in section ns integer section. Now we're going to return the number of cars, so junkyard cars count. So we call to this cars count method. The junkyard object will return a number containing the amount of cars it has, and we'll know how many cars the table view needs to list. And then last, UI table view cell table view cell for row at index path. Okay, so of course as I do this, I assume you already know how to list some data in a table view. If not, you should watch the table view list data video and then come back to this. So first we're going to check if the table view has already used the basic cell we're going to use here, which we're going to give identifier main cell. If not, let's create that cell for reuse. Cell equals my table view cell alloc init with style. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna create a cell with 2 labels. So we're gonna use the style subtitle, and that's gonna give us a big black left align label, and underneath that a smaller gray label. So init with style UI table view cell style subtitle. We use identifier main cell and then the auto release method, so we don't waste any memory here. Okay, now we've got our table view cell, and now we can give it the appropriate text to display. So first, let's figure out what car we want to display. So we're going to get the cars array, and then object at index path.row. Now, I wouldn't suggest doing this if you're dealing with a large amount of data. And that's simply because you don't want to have to create an entire copy of the cars array each time you list a row. So this is probably a really bad way to do this. But we know we only have 2 cars, so I'm doing this just to save time, and it's not really going to make a difference. 2 arrays with 2 objects is not a whole lot of memory. So if you did anticipate a lot of cars, what I'd do is I would suggest creating an instance variable. So in fact, we might as well just do that now since it's been brought up. Let's create an instance variable, ns array cars, and now when we each time we run through each row, let's check to see if that array exists. So if cars equals nil, cars equals junkyard get cars. And then instead of creating a brand new copy of that array each time we want to get a car out of it, let's just do that. So now we save some memory here. Now again, it doesn't matter here much, but if you have a lot more data, it'll definitely matter. Okay, so now we've got the car. So we're finding out the car at the index path. So if we have two cars in our cars array in the junkyard, then we're going to get, when the table view tries to draw row 0, we're just going to get the car at in the array at index 0. And when the table view tries to draw the car, or the row 1, we're just going to get the car at index path row 1. So basically everything's just in sequential order. Now let's set up our cell here. So cell text label text equals string with format. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have basically first the company, then the model, then the color. So we're going to, if this were the first car, it would say Toyota Matrix in black. So this is C-style formatting here, and these %@ tokens here are to be replaced by what comes after the quotes in respective order after each comma. So first car for row, and we're going to get the company property, then car for row the model property, and then car for row dot color for the color property. So this first %@ will be replaced by this, the second one by this, and so on and so forth. You can have as many of these as you want, of course, as long as you have the right amount of commas afterwards. Then underneath, in the detail label, which is going to be the small one, underneath the large black label, car for row dot VIN. So we'll have the vehicle identification number underneath that. Now let's return the cell, and our application should be complete. So let's save this and launch it. And there we have it. We have two rows in our table view. First one reads Toyota Matrix in black and this vehicle identification number. Second one, Toyota Supra in white. So now if we just go back to dash code here and look at our XML file, you can see that it matches up exactly. So first one, Toyota Matrix black, and then the identification number underneath, and the same thing for the second car. So parsing XML with the iPhone is really not hard at all once you get the hang of it. Again, it's not so much about grasping any logic. It's really just learning the procedure and being able to regurgitate it each time you parse an XML file. So that concludes this XML parsing lesson for the iPhone. I'm Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thanks for watching.